Today we're going to learn how to complete the square. We use this with quadratics when something doesn't factor out perfectly, or if we are wanting to put in something from standard form and put it into vertex form, we can use this. It's also just an easier way to set up your equation so you can graph out of it. So looking at the steps, you can see step one, move the c value in the quadratic equation to the right side of the equal sign. So we move it over. We divide by a and factor out for the coefficients on the left side. So basically we're factoring it so that we have an x squared with a coefficient of 1. And then the step 3 is where things, we really start to do a lot of the actual work of it, is we divide the second term, the b term, in half. And then we square it and add it to the left-hand side for a new c value. We still leave that bx there. And then to maintain balance, we add whatever we add on the left side to the right-hand side. Now we factor our new trinomial. It's going to factor into a perfect square. And then we leave the GCF out front. Finally, we want to move the constant from the right side back to the left side. And now we are in vertex form, and we can identify our vertex of HK. So if we look at example 1, we want to complete the square. So x squared plus 6x, and we need to fill in what's there. So basically we're going to follow step 3. And so that's 6, and we're going to cut it in half. So that leaves us with 3. And then we square that 3, which is 9. So when we complete the square, it's x squared plus 6x plus 9. And now I'm going to show you something when we factor. So if we were going to factor x squared plus 6x plus 9, we would say what two numbers multiply to be 9, because 1 times 9 is 9, and then add up to 6. And we would say it's 3 and 3. So that would be x plus 3 times x plus 3, which is just x plus 3 squared. So that's kind of where completing the square gets its name. And then if you notice, the b term that was cut in half is our factor. And that's what's going to happen over and over again. You're going to see that as we do more of these examples. So now let's look at example 2. It asks us to put x squared minus 8x plus 19 into vertex form. So like if you looked at it, you wouldn't be able to factor it very easily. You'd have to use either the quadratic formula or what we're doing now, which is completing the square. So we want to set it equal to 0. And our first step is we need to move the c value. So in this case, it's 19. So to move the 19 to the other side, we need to subtract 19. So it becomes x squared minus 8x equals negative 19. So now we look at the x squared. There's no number attached to it, so its coefficient is 1, which is what we want it to be. And so our b value now we need to cut in half. So the b value is negative 8. We chop it in half, and we get negative 4. And then we just have to square that term. So negative 4 squared is 16. Now make sure you're being very careful if you're trying to use a calculator for this, because if you just typed in negative 4 squared on your graphing calculator, it would probably tell you negative 16. You'd have to put that negative 4 into parentheses and then square that whole thing in order for it to be 16. But we all know when you multiply negative by a negative, it ends up positive. So we're going to add 16 to both sides. So we have x squared minus 8x, and then we add 16 to the left. And since we added 16 to the left-hand side, we also need to add 16 to the right-hand side. So we can factor x squared minus 8x plus 16. It is x minus 4 times x minus 4, or x minus 4 squared. And you can look and see that's exactly what the b value was cut in half, is negative 4. And then it equals negative 3, because negative 19 plus 16 is negative 3. And so if we want to put this into vertex form, we need to bring that negative 3 over. So it's going to be x minus 4 squared, and then we got to add 3. And so that equals 0. That's our vertex form right there. And our vertex, if you remember, inside the parentheses moves us left and right, and x is lied to us, so we know because it's negative 4, it moves to the right 4. And then outside our k value, the 3, stays the same. So our vertex for number 2 would be 4, 3. If we look at number 3, now we're given an example that has something other than 1 as the coefficient in front of the x squared. So we'll see how we do this. Set it equal to 0, move that 7 over. So we're going to have 5x squared plus 10x equals negative 7. And so now on the left-hand side, we need to factor out a 5 from the other two terms. So it's going to become 5 times x squared plus 2x in parentheses. And then the right-hand side stays negative 7. So you can see we took out a 5 from the 5x squared and from the 10x. And so we're left with x squared plus 2x. So now our b value in this case is 2. So we need to divide 2 by 2, which gives us 1. And when we square 1, that's still just 1. So we need to plug that in inside the parentheses. So on the left-hand side, you would have 5 times the quantity x squared plus 2x plus 1, and it equals negative 7. And now you need to be careful with how many did we actually add to the left-hand side. You might want to say 1, but we put the 1 there, but it's inside parentheses, and outside the parentheses is a 5. So it's actually 5 times 1. So on the right-hand side, we need to add 5. And now we can factor it. So x squared plus 2x plus 1 factors out to be x plus 1, the quantity squared. And on the right-hand side, we have a negative 2. So to put it in vertex form, we move that negative 2 over. So we have 5 times x plus 1 squared plus 2. And it's still equal to 0. So that means in this case, our vertex would be negative 1, comma 2. So there's the first 3 examples. And then in class today, everyone got to try the next 3, but we'll work them out just so you have them. So our second completing the square, x squared minus 3x plus a blank, we use negative 3. We cut that in half. We're just going to leave it as that improper fraction of negative 3 over 2. Now, I have to square it. So with a fraction, square the top and square the bottom. So negative 3 squared is 9, and 2 squared is 4. So when we complete the square, it would be 9/4. But normally we don't want to deal with fractions, so we won't really have too many that are like that. They'll all be whole numbers. All right, we have number 2, 3x squared plus 18x equals 66. So the difference here is that now the 66 has already been moved over. So we don't have to do our step 1. We go right to step 2, divide our a value out. So it's 3 times x squared plus 6x, and that equals 66. So now we can run through our little formula, cut 6 in half, that's 3. 3 squared equals 9. So we're going to add that to the left, so it's 3 times x squared plus 6x plus 9. And then just like the other example, we need to add 9 times 3 to the right-hand side. So we're adding 27. So now we can factor it. Remember, if you look at what 6 divided by 2 was, that will give you the factor. So it's 3 times x plus 3 squared equals 66 plus 27, which is 93. Now, if we were solving, so if I told you to solve for x here, at this point what you would do is divide by 3, and then to get rid of something squared, remember, you take the square root, because the square root undoes something squared, and if you square a square root, it undoes that. So basically that's how you get rid of each of the other two. So if we have a squared, we can always take a square root and we would be able to solve for x in this case. It would be, and when you take a square root, it's always plus or minus that square root value. So I'll actually solve it here. So if we did it that way. So that would be x plus 3 squared equals 93 divided by 3, which is 31. And then when we take the square root, we would get x plus 3 equals plus or minus the square root of 31. I would take that 3 over, so it would be negative 3 plus or minus the square root of 31. That would be our two roots of x, negative 3 plus or minus the square root of 31. Now, going back to here and finishing out the vertex form, it just means we bring the 93 over. So it would be 3 times the quantity x plus 3 squared minus 93 equals 0. So this is vertex form right there. Okay. And then finally, one last problem just to do it, just in case you're not sure. X squared plus 2x minus 33 equals 0. So we move that negative 33 over. X squared plus 2x equals positive 33. And we've already factored this one. The one's right above it. 2 over 2 is 1. 1 squared is 1. And so it's x squared plus 2x plus 1 equals 33 plus 1. And so when we factor that, we get x plus 1, the quantity squared equals 34. And putting it in the vertex form, we just bring the 34 over. And we get our answer. Here is our vertex form. All right, so that is completing the square. Hopefully you feel confident now trying to do these and understanding the steps.